Hello and welcome to Dinis Guarda YouTube podcast show, once more powered by citiesabc.com, businessabc.net, and wisdomia.ai. We live in a world full of excitement and as well full of challenges. And in this series, we continue profiling some of the people that are changing the world and looking especially for, I would say, the most radical things when it comes to business and technology. And as well, of course, when you look at these things, probably the most important that touch us is the sense of security, the sense how we deal with all the challenges that we're facing. And especially in a time when technology is becoming more advanced, or at least at the same level as humans, we have a lot of considerations to look at this. So this episode is going to be particularly special. It's an area that I'm very excited. And I welcome to our series, Eric Michael O'Neill. Eric is a national security or U.S. security attorney, corporate investigator, and national cybersecurity strategist, the legendary FBI operative. Eric's career began in the FBI Counterintelligence trenches as an undercover operative, and his undercover work brought down Robert Hansen, the most notorious and damaging spy in the United States history. After serving in the FBI, Eric earned his Juris Doctor degree from the Washington University Law School with honors. He has worked since as a national security attorney and corporate investigator at top firms like the legal firm DLA Piper. Eric is the founder of the Georgetown Group, a premier security services firm, and he serves as a national security strategist to cybersecurity companies including CyberSponse, Inc., NeXasure, and the VMware Carbon Black, to name a few. He has also had senior positions including General Counsel and Chief Ethics Officer for global communities. He's as well very world-sick, renowned public speaker and cybersecurity strategist, inspiring audiences and business and organizations to protect themselves and giving them actionable tools to do so. As a media commentator, he's been covered by all the major global international media like CNN, C-SPAN, Fox, Newsweek, TechCrunch, and a lot of others. And as well, some of his story has been recreated by Hollywood with the Universal Pictures critically acclaimed movie Bridge, starring Ryan Phillips as Eric O'Neill and Chris Cooper and Robert Hansen. And of course, we're going to be talking as well about his last book, The Great Day, My Undercover Mission to Expose America's First Cyber Spy. And his upcoming book, The Invisible Threat, it's set to be published in 2025. So a lot of things I could be reading more, but Eric, welcome to our series. It's an honor to have you here.
And Dinis, thanks for having me on, and it's an honor to be here.
So Eric, someone that has been dealing with so much, I would say, global and national security areas, it all starts somewhere. So a bit of your history, and especially before you enter in this career, I don't know, I would like to go back to your education. If you would imagine you where you are now and a bit of your background.
Sure. I went to college, as many people do here in the U.S., and was looking for some place that I fit. I actually went to Auburn University down south as an aerospace engineer, and I spent a year in aerospace engineering before I transferred over to architecture and did a little stint in computer science, and then finally ended up in psychology and political science. And this was after a few other majors, just because I found I had the credits for that. And I thought I was going to leave school, become an attorney, which I ended up doing down the road. It was just a little lengthy process to get there. And probably because I was reading too many John Grisham novels, I thought my job was going to be to pick juries. And I was going to use psychology and some of the political science and all these things that I learned to pick the perfect jury for a case. And that isn't how things happen, because there's so many things in life. You kind of find your path, or your path just finds you. And what happened was I had left school, got a job as a litigation consultant, which was not an attorney and not the same gravitas, was unhappy in that job and looked for something that would have meaning. And for me, that was joining the FBI. I joined the FBI as a ghost, which is the cool term for the investigative specialist in the Special Surveillance Group. Our job was to follow spies and terrorists all over the DC area, which is where I operated, and stop them before they did whatever dastardly deed they were trying to do. So my background in the FBI was in the science of counterintelligence. Counterterrorism is just a way of deploying counterintelligence against terrorists instead of spies. And so that background became very important to inform much of my thought leadership in cybersecurity. And I know we'll get into that in a bit. But being in the FBI, learning how to understand the tradecraft, the workings of spies who are trying to steal secrets, and then knowing how to counter them using various tactics and techniques was a critical step in my learning. And it informed how I was going to think not only about tackling cybersecurity, which I ended up falling into, but business in general. It gave you a very specific way of thinking about the world and how you can use data and information in order to make the best decisions. If you're in the FBI, it's how you catch a spy before they steal secrets or a terrorist before they blow something up. But as I deployed in starting companies and going into the world and being more of an entrepreneur, it informed how I synthesize data quickly in order to make good decisions, whether it's in business or otherwise.
Well, that's an amazing story. And of course, when you look at these things, probably you think about the science fiction and James Bond films and all this kind of series. Right. But this has a massive impact in our society. And as well, one of the things that I always look at this is the size of the threats related in a lot of areas. So this is not new in history, probably. They say that spies are the oldest jobs in history, let's put it that way. But there's a lot of confidence here, especially in history, people would spy, but would have consequences more, of course, in national security. But now we're talking about something that can impact the entire civilization, and in some cases can actually have massive disruption in social economics and a lot of different areas. So from your education, and as well, you have, of course, a very strong academic background. So from your education to the FBI and then as an author, just a bit of before we go to your achievements and your career, how do you see this kind of crossover in terms of your education and career? Because probably, like you said, from reading the novels to become part of that, and as well then becoming a thought leader and the speaker, how have you been seeing these different levels and how you see the perception that this takes to different audiences?
Right. Well, I did end up going to law school, and I ended up going to law school while I was in the FBI, working undercover, which I think is the craziest thing you could do. I actually, when I talk to friends who are interested in, and now it's their children are interested in going to law school, I tell them, beg, borrow, steal, do whatever you can so your kid can be a day student and have fun. I was going to school at nights after I worked a full day at the FBI. Sometimes I had to miss operations or more often miss school because of them. And that was very difficult, but it did teach me time management. Working a undercover job where you move where your bad guy moves and you sleep when they sleep and you eat when they eat, and also trying to establish a career as an attorney meant that I had to be able to juggle a lot of balls. And that's something I certainly carried forward. Yeah, my background in cybersecurity started with a very early 1980s interest in computer systems when computers were the new thing, and building and growing year by year in not only the capability of the technology, but the expansion of things computers could do. This was very early. And back then, if you wanted to do anything with a computer, which, all the programs were on a floppy disk, you had to learn to code a little bit. So I started teaching myself code and working with friends and learning to take apart and build these things. Computer systems were always more of a hobby for me. But as I got into the FBI, I started realizing that a lot of the analysis we were doing could be done better by using some of the same databases I was using when I was in law school. And it boggled my mind that back then, squads in the FBI were taking paper and laying it out on big conference tables and trying to make connections that way. So I wrote a program, and it was a threat analysis program. What it did is it used data over time with the idea that Russians tend to plan out their operational goals year by year. So they will have a source in the United States, and they'll say, on all these dates, you will make a dead drop. You'll put your secrets in the ground somewhere special that only you and I know about. And all these dates, you would set a signal telling me that you've just put your secrets in the ground. So when I drive by, I see that piece of tape on a sign or a thumbtack in a pole, and I know that I can go pick up the secrets. Well, they have to plan this out a year, 2 years in advance. And all those dates are hard dates. So if you look at the past and things that we've learned, you can predict the future. And the database worked. Now, in the FBI, when you do things above and beyond, it doesn't get you a lot of credit. It makes you more notorious. But it did help me learn a new way of analyzing data and deploying both my learning in science and counterintelligence with that background in computers and computer systems and programming. And the marriage of those two really were the genesis of my thought leadership in cybersecurity.
This is as well, and I want to highlight for people listening to us, of course, now everyone talks about cybercrime and cybersecurity, but if you go back 20 years, 30 years, and you're still young, but there was not the computer. The internet is less than 20 years old.
Right.
So I want, before we go to your career, so as well, you were one of the first person to, of course, in one end, look at spy and cyber and all these different things, but as well, realizing cybercrime and cybersecurity as something that now is mainstream, but just 10, 20 years ago was not mainstream, and probably most of the people are not talking about that unless you are really in computer science and so forth. So as well, within the FBI and as well as a lawyer as well, you went through all these things. And one end, there's the policies around this, there's the fact that realizing how big this is, and just for people listening to us, the cybersecurity ventures predict that cybercrime will cost the world economy 9.5 trillion annually in 2024, this year we are on. So that means this is 10% of the world economy. So I want your views on this before we go, of course, to your career, which is amazing.
Certainly. Well, the actual number in 2024 is over 12 trillion. That was a early prediction. I think that was a 2021 prediction, and the number hit more than 12. And my prediction is by 2026 will be at 20. If you just look at the astronomical growth of cybercrime trued up against the inability of law enforcement to substantially take down the major cybercrime syndicates. So cybercrime is a big thing. Right now, if you look at cybercrime as a gross domestic product, right? You think $12 trillion in just cybercrime moving through the dark web, where all the bad guys are not only hiding from law enforcement, but it's a system that allows them to get paid with mostly cryptocurrency. There are other ways that they get paid, but that's the number one way because it's more difficult for law enforcement to trace. So if you were to look at the dark web, just cybercrime dark web, there's a lot of other bad stuff going through there. I mean, many more trillions of dollars in crime, but just cybercrime. And then the dark web, by terms of gross domestic product, is the third largest economy on earth. It still goes to the United States and then China. Then it's the dark web, which is now bigger than the next two countries, which would be Germany and then Japan put together. So that's extraordinary. And that's something we have to worry about, because this crime unchecked means that more young enterprising people are deciding to become criminals because it is not seen as the same crime as, say, robbing a bank with a firearm, right? Certainly the crimes are never victimless. People get very harmed when, they lose their life savings at sometimes. Criminal elements are using, there's no better way to put it than indentured servitude or forced labor, where they will round up people and force them into call centers and they have to make their quotas or they're beaten. These dark web call centers are springing up in countries all over the earth, and crime is increasing. So it behooves us in cybersecurity to start working to solve the problem ourselves. And the way to do that is to become more resilient and strong. So yeah, when you look at cybercrime, it is growing. And I was one of the first people to say, it's my byline throughout the book, Gray Day, there are no hackers, there are only spies. And people are like, well, what do you mean by that? And, Eric has spies in the brain. Everything he talks about is spies. And okay, maybe a little bit, because my background was catching spies. That's what I did for a living. But as I moved into cybersecurity, my thought leadership was pushing the envelope a little. Then this is, 15 years ago, saying we have to stop thinking of cyber criminals as this hacker, because I do this in keynotes all the time. I ask people, put in your mind the first image that pops in your head when I say hacker. Okay, got it? Who thought of a kid in a basement typing away at a keyboard, black hoodie, right? Yells at grandma, leave me alone. Pounds an energy drink, bad carbs, hits one key on his keyboard and says what? In every movie and TV show that falsely represents the cyber attacker. He says, I'm in. I mean, that's like magic, just typing in a keyboard and suddenly you're in. That's not the way that attacks are happening. They're using social engineering. They're using confidence schemes, impersonation attacks, and now generative AI to build these very, very deceptive attacks. And this is all borrowed from the espionage playbook. So when I say there are no hackers, there are only spies, what I mean is that espionage has evolved and so has cybercrime. We took all that stuff that used to be in paper, we put it in computer systems, and the spies had to evolve to steal it where it is. So spies are using cyber attacks, and criminals have learned from them to deploy some of the best cyber attacks out there.
Yeah, I want to touch more of that. But before we go there, so for people listening to us, I think, of course, my audience is quite sophisticated because, of course, it would not be here to listen for 1 hour of personalities like yours. But I think one of the challenges we have in everything you just mentioned, and that's why I'm very excited to have you here, is that in one end, there's two narratives. There's the narrative of course, James Bond, all these novels, all the fiction. And like you said, the portrait of hackers as some kind of the new heroes, rebels, and so forth. But then there's the reality of the $1 trillion that is hacking that affects everyone. And of course, so I want to touch about the dark web. Okay, like you mentioned, and I think it's important that people understand that, because one of the challenges I've been fighting, and I deal with governments all over the world, and really there's a big challenge, is even with my audience, I always provoke both my team and my audience, is how much digital savvy you are. And unfortunately, and I think it's probably the same with you, is that 90% of people don't understand digital, which is a big number, but I'm not saying this for the sake, I'm saying this from my experience. And I would say 99 don't understand then all the things we're talking about. So I think one of the challenges, first of all, we need to realize how impactful this is. And we need to be part, like you said, that we're part of this, all of us. And we are part of this directly or indirectly, or active or passive. Passive is probably worse, but there's a lot of impact. So I want to touch first the dark web. So, of course, the dark web, I would say a lot of people probably never had any contact directly with it. So from someone like you that is, of course, a world-renowned author and specialist on this, but as well an FBI expert and a lot of the education. So tell us a bit about the dark web for people, even on my audience. I probably never spoke about that here with some exceptions, but just for people, I'll repeat what you just said, the third biggest economy in the world, and as well becoming bigger in a lot of ways, because we have a very complex world, and as well AI is going to make it much bigger. So I want to hear from yourself because it's a key element.
Yeah, you're hitting the nail on the head, and you don't have to feel that you're not unsophisticated or knowledgeable if you don't know what the dark web is. It turns out very few people do. I speak to auditoriums filled with, 1,000 cybersecurity professionals. And I will say, who here knows exactly what the dark web is? And if I called you up here, could explain it. And maybe one or two hands go up out of thousands of people, right? So, we don't really understand what the dark web is or how it's designed or how it works. And that's one thing that I'm demystifying in my new book. I actually take a chapter where I sit down with a friend who's a dark web researcher. He's got the credentials of a bad guy, and he goes in there to go find the latest attacks and to help inform cybersecurity companies. To understand the dark web, in the most basic sense, you really have to understand what the internet is, right? A system of communication and network computers that spans the globe. And the internet right now is giant. It's 80 zettabytes of data and growing. By 2026, it'll be 180 zettabytes. And to give an idea of what a zettabyte is, if I stacked paper from my feet as high as 1 zettabyte, paper is data too, right? One page has data written on it. If I stacked it page by page as high as 1 zettabyte, it would go to the Andromeda galaxy, 1 light year of data. That's enormous, and we have 80 of those. So the internet is massive, and most of what we think of in the internet is only 10% of the internet. It's the things that are open, what we call the surface web. Anything you can Google, anything that you can ask your favorite browser and it returns a question. My web page, your web page, the things that we open and we want people to find. This is where marketing lives, advertising lives. This is where the compendium of all knowledge of human existence is at our fingertips. We used to, when we were kids, have to get an encyclopedia or go to the library. Now you just look it up online. That's only 10% of the internet. That bottom 90% is called the deep web. That's not a bad place. That's a good place. That is the secure layer of the internet. That's everything that cybersecurity is trying to protect. This is the areas where it's supposed to get difficult to access this information. These are your banking records. These are your medical records. This is all of the confidential data that you're storing in the cloud for your company. These are all the things you don't want people to see. Your private email accounts, your private social media accounts, everything that's secure with a username and password. And if you're really smart, 2 or 3 better steps than a password, which we get into it later, but they just don't work anymore. So you're protecting it. This is what the attackers want to steal. Now, 10% of that 90%, right all the way at the bottom, the smallest part of the internet is the dark web. But because the internet is so massive and growing, the dark web grows with it. It's like a parasite that lives off it. And the dark web lives on servers that exist all over the world. Some are volunteers. People add their server to the dark web. Some are actually on pirate islands that law enforcement can't reach, and they're major server farms. And some are just stolen from businesses all over the world. You might be running a business with a number of servers, and one of your servers has been secretly partitioned by bad guys as being used to feed the dark web. Because the dark web is just a different system of network servers that thrives as part of the internet. And it's very difficult to shut down and hard to find. You have to have a very special browser, you have to have specific know-how, and you have to actually know the physical keyed-in address of the dark web marketplace or message board or information resource you're trying to find, which is a good thing because we don't want people who are tourists or novices going into the dark web because 90% of the sites on there will just infect you with malware, ransomware, and steal your information. So you have to be knowledgeable to get there. But what I like to say is, here there be monsters. There is some of the worst stuff on earth can be bought and sold on the dark web. In addition to all of the cybercrime that is supported and helped and has an entire payment system in the dark web, you can buy everything from every illegal drug known to man to weapons to actual people. There's a massive slave trade, human slave trade on the dark web, to even things that are macabre like a body parts bazaar if you need an eye or a heart or a hand for some reason. So there's a lot there. It's hard to get to, which is sort of the bullet points. It's very difficult for law enforcement to defeat. Bad guys have backups too, and they just restore from backup once they're hit by law enforcement, rebrand with a new name, and start launching attacks again. And it allows criminals, cyber criminals, to not only launch attacks anonymously, it allows them to get paid because there's a full system of cryptocurrency wallets and payment systems that allow the criminals to make money off of their ill-gotten gains. So that's your quick, like 3-minute, 5-minute, I don't know how long it took, primer on what the dark web is and why it's so difficult to defeat.
Well, thank you so much. And I think for people listening to us, please look at this seriously, learn, educate yourselves, because in the end of the day, our data is there. But of course, it's about just being conscious about that is a big difference. And I always try that part here. So, Eric, I want to go through probably one of your most impactful roles was during your tenure at the FBI. You were part in capturing the spy Robert Hansen. That was a legendary achievement. And for people listening to us, Hansen, which was arrested in February 18, 2001 at Folkestone Park near his home in Vienna, Virginia, charged with selling American secrets to Russia for $1.4 million in cash and diamonds over a 22-year period. And this was one of the biggest, probably, espionage cases, I would say, probably in the last 50 years or so. So tell us about this history and how this changes a lot of things, and as well, because this was one of the first big cases of cybersecurity. Well, kudos for that, of course.
Right. Well, kind of my claim to fame, too. Robert Hansen was one of the most damaging spies in U.S. history, and certainly the most damaging spy in FBI's history. And the case to catch him was the most unique case the FBI had ever run. First of all, he spied for 22 years, which meant that he began his espionage as a spy for the Soviet Union, and spied so long he survived the collapse of the Soviet Union and the reformation into the Russian Federation, which is what we have today, and then reactivated himself and continued to spy. He was never recruited. He volunteered his services. He called all the shots. He never let his handlers in Russia know his identity, which is one of the reasons he survived so long. He was a master spy, but he was also a spy hunter. His training was as a counterintelligence analyst with an expertise in Russia. So he was like the bank manager who's stealing from his own bank because he knows every single security protocol. He knew who the spies were. He knew who to approach. He knew who to talk to, and he knew exactly how to set up his system of dead drops, where he would steal secrets from the FBI, and he would actually drop is a technical spy term, but he would wrap floppy disks of data. We're going back in time now, right? In his earliest spying, in trash bags and packing tape, so it would be protected from rain and the elements. And he would place that package under a bridge in Foxstone Park, right near his house in Vienna, Virginia. And then he would take a piece of tape, put it on the Foxstone's sign, which was a signal that his dead drop was set. This is all the super spy terminology for everyone. And then a Russian intelligence officer would leave the embassy, on a prearranged day and drive around all day to make sure nobody like me was following him. And when he felt safe, he would drive by that sign. And if he saw a piece of tape, he would know that it's time to pick up the secrets and go in and retrieve the drop and then leave Hansen money somewhere else. That's sort of the old way that espionage used to happen. But Hansen was one of the first spies to drop data, to drop floppy disks to his Russian handlers. Whereas, before him, the majority of information that was placed in dead drops like that all over the DC area was either in actual physical paper or images taken with a micro camera, and they'd have to develop the film. So Hansen was at the crest of a wave of a change in how espionage happens and stealing it through computer systems. And the computer systems at the FBI were just never ready to defend against someone like him. So how do you catch someone like him? Well, the FBI got a little lucky. They had put together a task force with the CIA, and they were looking for a source in Russia who could point them toward this legendary spy that we'd been after for over 2 decades. We knew that there was a spy because things were going wrong. We just couldn't see where it was going wrong or how or what was leading to it. And it turned out that one of the most prominent FBI special agents that we put on the task of catching this legendary spy called Gray Suit was Robert Hansen. So at one point, he was put in charge of catching himself. And if you're the spy, it's the best place to be. So at the very twilight of his career, before he's about to retire, so this is December of 2000, he retires in April of 2001. So just months before he's ready to get his gold watch, full pension, and leave the FBI, a former KGB source hands over a file of information that points directly at Hansen. It was all circumstantial, but it pointed at Hansen. And in that tiny little room of agents who received that information, just their hearts fell, because they knew that he had been put in charge of catching himself. And so they built the best mousetrap they've ever created in the FBI. They built an entire division in FBI headquarters, the earliest division that pursued cybersecurity in the FBI. And it was called the Information Assurance Section. And then they put him in charge of it. They said, look, you're our best programmer. You understand this stuff better than the rest of us. You've been saying for years that the FBI, you will get compromised by someone who understands computer systems. You understand computer systems. And they put him in charge of it. And then they looked around the FBI for this crack special agent who was able to go undercover and catch a spy face to face like this. They couldn't find anybody, because they couldn't find anybody specifically trained to do this that also knew how to turn a computer on. So they went deeper. They went past that group, that cadre of special agents specifically trained to go undercover, and they found me in a team of ghosts who had never spoken to a target, had always followed them from the shadows. That was my training. I used disguises. I used telephoto lenses. I used thermal imagers. I used all this technology and know-how and tradecraft to never actually speak to my target, but to always follow them and know where they were and then stop them before they did whatever they did. And suddenly they're going to put me in front of them because I knew how to turn a computer on. I could sell the idea of building cybersecurity. And it was a risk. And I was the riskiest part. And it just turned out I was good at it. I had a natural talent. I'd bounced around college, gone from this thing to that thing, and finally found my place in the FBI. And there, in that moment, in that case, found the thing that I'm very good at. Going undercover, fooling a person, using that psychology degree, and catching a spy. And we did it. We did it within 3 months. It took 22 years to learn about Hansen, but we caught him in 3 months. And I was able to do that by identifying where he probably kept the information that was going to lead us to his arrest. And it turned out to be a Palm Pilot. If anyone remembers that thing, it's there's actually one right there over my head. That's the one that was used in Breach. That Palm Pilot was just a PDA, but it stored information. Hansen loved it. He never was separated from it. And I was able to steal it from him in this thrilling scene that made a great scene for the movie Breach. And there's a great chapter about it in my book, Grade A. But steal it from him, get it copied, and get it back seconds before he walked in the room and caught me. And that information not only had where he was going to make his final drop to the Russians at that bridge in Foxstone Park, but exactly what time at night and what date. And so we were there before him, waiting in the woods, hidden, recording the whole thing. And he was arrested as soon as he walked out of the park. And that is how you catch a spy.
Wow. That's fascinating. And I think you should see the film for people who read the book. It's more important, I think, more fascinating. But just touching this, and of course, there's all the suspense and the thriller part of it, because just listen to you, this is quite emotional and as well very thrilling. But so tell us of how big were the all the damage that he was doing with this cyber hacking.
Well, he was one of the most damaging spies in history. Think of the height of the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union, when everyone was worried about a nuclear war. Hansen gave up our nuclear attack plan. And so it turns out the Soviets knew what we would do if there was a nuclear war, where we would fire, and what we'd do if they fired first or we fired first. Not only that, he gave up the continuity of government plan. So if there was a catastrophic attack, where our president and vice president and Congress and everyone, the cabinet and everyone who mattered would go to hide so that they could hit that too. If there was a nuclear war, we would have been in a lot of trouble. So fortunately, there wasn't. He also gave up undercover operations that we had run. I mean, these things can cost millions to billions of dollars and to set up, and he was giving them up before they even got off the ground. There were FBI agents who said that when Hansen was arrested and we learned the depth of his crimes, that they had spent entire careers in the FBI thinking that they made a difference, but it turned out that he was undoing everything they did. He also gave up lives. So he gave up the names of individuals who are our spies in Russia, who could have potentially not learned his identity, but told the FBI, we believe that the spy giving us all this information is in the FBI, which would have threatened him. He gave them up knowing that in the Soviet Union in those days, there's no big show trial with a celebrity attorney. You're just pulled into a back room and shot in the head, killed. And a number of them were terminated, and some were sent to hard labor for the rest of their lives. Between 84 and 85, thanks to Robert Hansen and another spy from the CIA named Aldrich Ames, the United States lost every single one of our assets in Russia. We were completely blind. And that was during the most pivotal time of the Cold War. And so much else. And the damage he caused was in the billions, and some of it is still getting corrected because of the depth of what he gave up for very little. I mean, he could have made 10 times what he made in those millions. Now, 1.4 million back in the 80s was a lot of money, and we don't know what else he got because, it's easy to hide diamonds or make those disappear. But he only took what he needed. He was smart in that way. He wasn't a spendthrift, and that was one of the easiest ways to get caught as a spy when, the FBI sees somebody driving around in a car they can't afford or going on vacations they can't afford, and they start questioning things.
Wow, it's just devastating how someone can do that to his own country, to his own teams, to his own colleagues, and as well, like you said, killing people in the middle and talking not about a lot of money. This is even more ridiculous, but it's not about the money. It's about how you do something like that. So after this, which is a massive achievement, and of course, I'm sure the United States owes you for a long time. But one question is, you decided to pick in one of the top parts of your career and decided to study law or continue to study and shift your career. So why that shift in career after something as big as this?
Well, there was nowhere higher to go. That was going to be the biggest case. When we broke that case, I remember one of the older agents that I truly respected coming up to me and kind of punched me on the shoulder and said, "So, Eric, how does it feel to work the best case you're ever going to work in your entire career in the FBI? These things sometimes don't come along for anybody, and there it is. And so you you at 27 have just worked your biggest career in the FBI. And I was thinking, well, there's nowhere up to go from here. Let's try something new. I think of the other reason, that's a tongue-in-cheek answer, but the real reason I was burned out at that point. I had spent 5 straight years undercover. I hadn't come out of cover in that entire time. I even worked undercover in the Hansen case as myself, which was the strangest thing in the world. Normally, you go undercover with a legend, a completely different name and identity, and here I had to be myself in case I ran into someone who knew me at headquarters. And I thought I need to repair my marriage. I had been married 3 months when I got put on this case, and I was never home. I was always at FBI or in law school and going back, to do searches of the office. When Hansen left, I was incredibly stressed, and I thought this is a good time to get out of the FBI. I was about to graduate law school and see what I can do with my law degree. And so I took a job doing national security law and government contracts, which flowed very nicely from the work I did at the FBI for one of the biggest firm on earth, DLA Piper. Learned an enormous amount. And after a short career there, decided to start my own company. And I started the Georgetown Group, and at the same time accepted, a part-time position at a charity called Global Communities, so I can continue to practice law as their first general counsel. And I still run the Georgetown Group. I left Global Communities earlier this year to focus on more of my entrepreneurship and speaking and writing. And having put in 15 years, I think I did my service there to make the world a better place.
They continue doing, I think, with all this education, this is more important than ever, I think. I think if when you were doing this was a percentage, now this is much, much bigger. So continue on this, and really fascinating. So your transition, like you just mentioned, from the FBI to corporate career, of course, brought a lot of new experience, both in the legal, of course, working with DLA Piper, and as well working with other organizations. So this was the inception of the internet as well during this time. So right. The internet was starting to grow, like you said, right now is the world economy, is in the internet, but the two things cannot be separated in a lot of ways. So tell us a bit your experience dealing with corporates, with organizations, and as well the process, because like I just said before, people still don't have a clue about most of these things. So I'm sure you went through a lot of cases and of course, for instance, recently we just had like one company had an issue and one software update took part of the world economy. So these things are happening and they might happen. For instance, right now, a lot of the fathers of AI are saying that we might have a catastrophic risk. So there's a lot of scenarios that can happen. A lot of them that happen in the shadow, thanks God, because some people like you are there looking to make sure that we continue working here. But a bit of your experience in the corporate world from the transition, and how do you see this, and for people listening to us to learn as well, and with your experience and what you want to share with us.
Certainly, Dinis. I think leaving the FBI was very difficult. It was like leaving a family, but it's also a source of critical information that you can't get anywhere else. And so it's like having this enormous spigot of information in some of the most secret things that are happening on Earth that's constantly flowing, and then one day, and then you leave the FBI and it's just shut. And you can't talk to anybody that were your friends or colleagues there because they can't. Now you're not in the circle of trust anymore. You're outside, and then transitioning from being an undercover field operative, where I was almost never in an office, to suddenly being a big firm lawyer where all day I sat in an office. That was a bit difficult as well. But I think that the way the FBI taught me to think, to analyze, and to take that information and synthesize it into operative facts truly got me ready to be an attorney. It was a great benefit in law school. I could, in a lot of the work that I did in the FBI, I could actually, during an exam, go back in my mind and see the class where the professor explained the answer, right? I could just visualize it. And I've always sort of had that ability to record things in my memory. So that certainly helped as an attorney as well. But look, I've always been one who needs new challenges. I felt like I tackled the idea of being an attorney. I wasn't quite sure I wanted to be at the big firm forever. I was happy to do it until I paid off all my student debt and my house and all that. But then I decided that part of my progression was to start my own company. And that was the genesis of deciding to start the Georgetown Group, which is a company that does competitive intelligence. And so there I was marrying everything I had learned in counterintelligence with my background in law and understanding intrinsically what corporate clients need in terms of information to make the best decisions. So what we say is we empower trust. And my idea was you get some data in a transaction, like when a company's buying a company, from the attorneys. And I knew what that was because I worked in mergers and acquisition. And you get other data from the accountants, right? But that doesn't give you a whole picture. There's a piece of data that's missing about a deal. And that was what I wanted to fill in. It was the frustration I had every time I worked in mergers and acquisitions deal as an attorney. I was like, I'm looking at this company and I know there's more there that I could go find. And I was doing it on my own. So it was great as an attorney. It was my service plus more. And I thought, well, what if we started a company and did this? And I started talking to some partners and we decided to do it. And 15 years later, we're still going strong.
No, that's really important. And I think for people listening to us, I think the opportunity is that this is just getting bigger, getting more complex, and probably the impacts are going to be bigger as we go to new directions. So a couple of questions just on this. So there's, of course, like you said, there's a relationship between national and international security and cybersecurity. This is just evolving when we get into the current digital age, and especially with AI. So what are the trends, or you see the trends going, for instance, because I think you are unique because you have the background of cybersecurity and cybercrime, and of course the FBI background, but you have the legal background, and of course one of the biggest law firms in the world background. So you can actually touch a lot of things. And for instance, when you're touching the world economy right now, we're touching mostly all the digital flows, all the challenges with even a public company, the data on this public company, the IP, a lot of different things. And for people listening to our podcast, even when I interview people here, there's people you can say, and people or things you can say, things you cannot say. So there's a lot of levels here. So how do you see this present stage of cybersecurity and the evolution, and probably some of the emergent threats that you should look probably more than ever?
Right. Well, cybersecurity is difficult. And the reason that it is difficult is because cybersecurity tends to spend too much time on defense. And defense doesn't work. What I bring to cybersecurity is counterintelligence. Counterintelligence doesn't mean you're sitting and waiting for something to happen. It means you are sending spy hunters out to go find the bad guys before they launch their attack. And that is the transition that has to be made, and is being made by some of the top cybersecurity companies. In cyber, we call it threat hunting, right? You have people who understand the mind of the attacker and who are spending their time not just monitoring and watching, but actually actively going out and hunting threats. That takes a long time and a lot of discipline for a human to do that. And here's where, Dinis, we're going to get into some of the AI stuff you mentioned. AI can do that much faster. So the top tier cybersecurity is deploying AI in order to do a lot of that threat hunting behind the scenes. And it has to be that way because at the same time, the major cybercrime syndicates who are launching their attacks off the dark web are using their own AI. They're deploying AI not only to launch attacks and perfect those attacks and write code. And, 2 months ago, AI wasn't so great at writing code. Right now, it's excellent. That's how fast the technology is progressing and learning. Criminal attackers are also using AI to do what's called counter surveillance. So they're using AI to look for cybersecurity when they're launching infiltration attacks. So just give an idea. If a cybercrime syndicate wants to infect a city, like the city of Dallas, for example, with a ransomware attack, and, they're big game hunters is what they call themselves. They want to take down a city and force the city to pay, right? Because people can't pay bills, people can't get water, people can't go to the library, people can't use all the things they need. And then what they'll do is not only attack using known vectors, but they'll use AI to go scan for weaknesses in cybersecurity and find those holes and flaws where cybersecurity is not protecting and try to launch their attack there. So what cybersecurity can do is constantly be using their own AI to be scanning for the attacks, but also be out hunting those attacks. So, what I said in an op-ed not too long ago is that if everybody remembers the movie Tron, where, it's a bunch of programs fighting in cyberspace, we thought, wow, that's sort of funny back then, but that's literally what's happening now. you've got good AI and bad AI, and they're all fighting behind the scenes. We don't see it, but it's happening. And that war right now is the war over our data. And data has become the currency of our lives. So protecting that data is important because everything we have is in data. You know, everything from all of our money down to, you know, those favorite family pictures spanning years that you just can't afford to lose. It's all data. So we need to protect it. And AI is making it difficult because criminals aren't just using it the way I just explained and launching attacks and doing counter surveillance to try to find cybersecurity, just as it's trying to find the criminals, but they can scale their operations. All the things that AI helps all of us do in making ourselves, allowing ourselves to work faster, to reduce the number of mundane tasks. I mean, just think about writing an article and researching it. You can use AI to do a lot of the research for you, to synthesize some of the sites that you found or sources, even to write the endnotes for those sources. It just cuts down on all the grunt work. You're still doing the creative work. If you're smart, you don't want AI to do that because someone will immediately find out you're a plagiarist. But AI can cut down on a lot of the work. And that's happening everywhere, from programming to operations to, you know, putting together spreadsheets and presentations. AI is assisting our lives in many ways, but it's also helping the bad guys. They can scale operations. You don't need to hire 5 programmers and give them a cut of your ransomware proceeds, when you can use AI to do a lot of that writing for you, and then you just have one person who does quality control and checking. So it means that a lot more people can also get into the cyber attacker game because they can use AI to help them, and they don't have to learn as much. So look, it's a curse, but it's also a panacea. It's going to help us and inform us and lift us up. It is also, like all technology, going to, in some ways, bring us down. And it's up to us as humans, just as with everything else we invented, to do our best to use it ethically and punish those who abuse it.
Yeah, this really, we all have a responsibility, but we're all dependent of this. So my next question is, so when we look at this, and of course you are a super expert, but most of the people here will just go for the challenges. And I would say they just pray that happen, which is not the best strategy. I think should be prepared to on any eventuality. So when you look at critical strategies, and I want to go a bit more in detail if it's okay for you. So if you look at the biggest trends right now when it comes to cybersecurity and dark web statistics, is mostly that we have a lot of things, like you said, about our data. We have all the things about cryptocurrency issues related with this, credit cards, that is probably the biggest thing, employee login information, which is probably the biggest issue, Zoom accounts and meeting details, fake identities and passports, illegal drugs. But then when we come, and this is the part, I think everyone one way or the other knows, especially my audience, but the part that I think people are ill-prepared, and I think even looking at people I work with, top universities, and I don't see the universities highlighting both AI and both cybersecurity because everyone needs to do it. So I just want to, if you could, mostly in terms of these strategies around things that are really the biggest thing. So you touch ransomwares, there's malware attacks, DDoS attacks, social engineering, which means phishing emails, phone calls, and protecting, credential-based attacks, and of course, all these different things that are becoming much, much bigger to the size of what you mentioned. So tell us a bit about this, and from a legal perspective, because you have multiple heads, how can people prepare for that? But as well, how can corporations work with professionals like yours to prepare to avoid these things, but as well to have an action in place? Because that's the challenge, is when this happens, you touch cities. A lot of cities have the entire data in the dark web. I'm sure all the data is in dark web anyway. But there's a lot of things, for instance, hospitals taking down. You can actually have millions of people that can die. And of course, if you look at science fiction, this is happening all the time. Like you mentioned, Tron. But there's a lot of things that actually, there was a quote from James Cameron that is recent, but it makes complete sense. That is, right now it's difficult to write science fiction because you're living science fiction. So I just wanted to touch a bit of that and how you look at these things, especially for people that are not so aware of this.
Yeah, by the time you finish your fiction book, the science has progressed so far, you got to go back and rewrite it. And then, each time, right. So yeah, I see what you mean. I think let's touch on some of the most critical issues that I think people need to think about. It used to be that you had virus scanners that would stop known, infections, that the scanner would update. And this is all the stuff that we don't want to allow to run on a computer. And that doesn't work anymore because so much of the code is novel, right? So we progressed into, from antivirus to anti-malware, cybersecurity that looks at things that look bad and knows what looks good and knows what it makes judgment calls and stops things that are major threats. And cybersecurity has gotten pretty good at that. So what attackers have done is stop wasting their time on it. Because the easiest way to compromise a computer system, whether it's your computer or my computer we're using right now to talk to each other, or an entire enterprise network at a company, a government agency, a city, a municipality, is to attack a person. Who's the best at compromising people in the world, in history? Spies. So what criminals have done, they've learned from spies. And that's why I want to just focus in on, one term you use, which is social engineering. The majority of successful cyber attacks happen because a person was fooled, deceived, compromised, a compromise scheme, an imposter scheme, into handing over the keys to their data. And so how do some of these things work? Well, one of the easiest ways for an attacker to launch an attack against you is to learn everything about you. And in our society today, very handily for them, we put everything about ourselves out on social media. Just throw it all out there. So they can learn a lot about us by learning about us on social media. And then the idea is to deceive us. And there are a number of ways to do it. In the old days, if you wanted to recruit a spy, there were a number of ways that were, your straight up ways to do it. You bribe them. I know you have problems at home. I know you have a huge mortgage. I'm going to give you $100,000 and you help me steal secrets. Or you blackmail them. I've got pictures of you doing something that you don't want your wife or your grandma to know. And if you don't help me, it's, I'm sending the images to them or to your employer or to your boss or to the U.S. government. And so now they're hooked. Or ideology. You think a lot like me, right? So you should help me because your employer is scum, your country is terrible, and you owe it. Your duty is to do this, right? This all works. Criminals are just using the same thing. They're just not being so upfront about it. So what they can do is they learn a lot about you, and they learn the kinds of things that are going to get you to do something you shouldn't, like open an attachment you shouldn't, or click a link you shouldn't, or just hand over your social security number and information because they fooled you into believing they're the IRS and it's tax season, or they're your bank, or any number of ways. So they're using what's called imposter scams, and that's social engineering. So here's what I want to get to, because it's getting worse. So we're going to take that age-old social engineering attack, which is I send you an email, you believe the email, and you do something you're trained not to do, like open an attachment or click a link, right? Now take it to the next level. So what attackers are doing is they're using AI to make this really difficult. So instead of sending you an email, I send you a link from your boss to a Zoom call, just like this one. And you jump on the Zoom call, and there's your boss, and he tells you, I need you to send a wire because this is a very confidential acquisition of a company. And if this wire doesn't go out in the next hour, we're going to miss the opportunity. Email me or text me when you've sent the wire. And that terminates the call. Well, you've just talked to your boss. In this world where we all work remote, one would assume, well, I saw him, he said it, we're on a Zoom call, but it was all AI, an AI avatar. That's what criminals are doing. They are using these very deceptive attacks, not to type a bunch of keys and to fool a computer, but to fool a person. And by the way, that wire fraud attack, whether it's an email that does it or a text or a chat sometimes in Zoom conferences or an AI avatar that completely fools the person, it's in the, tens of billions of dollars of crime stolen from companies every year. So in order to stop attacks, it's not just robust technology and it's not just training. It is getting people to start thinking like spy hunters. We've got to change our mindsets. And that's a lot of my thought leadership is you have to think like someone who's trying to stop a spy, not someone who's trying to stop the kid in the basement, with the hoodie. but a full group of people who have just spent weeks learning everything about you in order to craft the perfect attack to get you to do something you know in your gut you shouldn't. But through coercion or by sending you something that's too good to be true, there's your bribery, or by appealing to your nature, making you think that this is something you should do. That's your ideology. It's just the old spy playbook in a brand new cybercrime world.
Yeah, this is really, you put it in a master way, but it's really important. And I think right now I want to touch what you said about the engineering part and the relationship with AI. Because, of course, the challenge right now is that, of course, for instance, my companies and my organization builds very sophisticated avatars. And mostly both you and me can create, actually in this own podcast, I had actually my avatar talking on my behalf. Actually, if you see my podcast, the last 3 or 4 videos, it's not me. Of course, you will not realize it's me and not me. So this, of course, is done for good. And part of my work is highlighting, and that's why I did as well Leonardo da Vinci and Einstein. But the challenge, like you said, is that we have this kind of level, especially with AI becoming so advanced. And I interview a couple of the biggest names in AI in this podcast. And the challenge is that at the moment we are, like you mentioned on film Tron, getting into the digital sentience. So we're going to have another element that is, of course, now we get into science fiction, but science fiction is right now reality, is that we are dealing not only for people that can actually go and do the social engineering and reverse engineering, everything that is happening to get their results, but you're going to have as well advanced technology that might start interacting with us. I think this will still be in the next few years, but things go very fast, where you're going to have a lot of layers happening. So how do you see this kind of challenge that we have? Because, of course, you are in the US, and the US is a democracy. I'm in the UK, and it's still a democracy. But if you go, the rest of the world is not democratic. So the values are not the same. And you mentioned Soviet Union, or in right now Russia. We have Africa, we have Asia. So there's a lot of challenge. And first, I remember that I was doing a conference as well in a country in Asia, and everyone was talking about the issues of data around Facebook and Facebook not. And they said, well, you guys still have Facebook. We don't have anything to say. So that made me think a lot in different ways. So we're dealing with a lot of challenge right now that are really much more on a velocity that we never had in history. And for instance, you mentioned something that happened in 22 years. There was one person, but now the scale and the velocity of this can actually create a lot of things. So how can we, so the question is, or I know that is a big topic, but the question is, especially with your corporate and legal hats, how can we prepare ourselves? And as well, one of the things, sometimes I have days that I wake up and I build AI, so I'm always excited and at the same time scared, is like if I deal with my children, of course, I love them more than anything, but I have to educate them. And I have to keep interacting with my children and make sure that I give them good values. Right. So at the moment, we're dealing with a lot of complexities of legal, geopolitics, technology, and of course, when it comes to cybersecurity, the risk is always, okay, I want something out of you, and I'm going to do everything to get it. And normally, like you said, these people don't have the best interests of anyone. So I just want to touch mostly on a macro picture way. How can we prepare ourselves and first not become cynical? Because the biggest challenge is with all of this, people become cynical. And of course, we get issues. And I think that's my first, that's a very important question, picking what you said before.
Well, there's a lot to unpack, but let's start from where this all came from. We had this pandemic, which no one talks about anymore, which is kind of amazing. It's almost like saying the word COVID-19 is like in the Harry Potter series yelling the name Voldemort. Like no one wants to hear it. Everybody goes away. No, we want to pretend
I agree with you.
But it changed our lives in a technologically sense, one very important way. You used to go into a studio, right, to record these sort of things. Now we can record a podcast anytime, anywhere, right? But you used to also go in an office. Like you don't even go in an office anymore. I don't know a lot of people who go in the office, and when they do, it's begrudgingly, right? I have clients who I've never met face-to-face, and they've been my clients for years. And so that is the new normal. In industry, we don't even say remote anymore. We say hybrid first, meaning that some people are remote, 2 or 3 people might be in the office. Some people might be coming into the office every once in a while, but every communication objective must be hybrid first, meaning that the people who are remote don't get left out. So even when people are sitting around in an office, somebody's in Zoom, right? Somebody's on the screen. It's changed the entire architecture of our offices. I know entire companies who no one even has an office. When you do come in, you sit down somewhere, plug in your laptop, and that's your workstation, right? No pictures of your family. It's very impersonal. I work from home. I don't go into an office anymore. So that has changed how we work, how we communicate, and how we're deceived. Because, man, it is so much easier to fool you if you've never met me. How do you know this is me? How do I know it's you, right? It's, that handshake. But I think that's where we have to be a little bit smarter about not trusting what we see on the internet, because so much of it is synthetic and so much of it is fake and so much of it is just garbage. And also, technology has to get embedded there. So just looking at AI avatars, which I know you're in that space, they're getting better and better in a scary way. We're going to have, and now there's also good stuff, right? We're going to have entire movies that are completely produced by one person sitting at a computer with beautiful cityscapes and scenes. And all it takes is the ingenuity of the mind and powerful AI to create avatars that do the acting. It could even change the voices. One person could do all the voices for all the characters. That's going to change that industry completely. On the same token, this makes it very easy for criminals to impersonate us and use confidence scheme attacks, these attacks of old in a modern setting, where if you don't have a little bit of knowledge and you don't have a little bit of training, you're going to be fooled because you expect that the person I'm talking to, it's how humans are engineered, is the person that I believe they are. We haven't sort of come to be as critical and suspicious of this new way of Zoom communication as we should. And I think that at some point, technology is going to have to evolve and start looking at it. So when you log into Zoom, a pop-up will say, this is an avatar, right? This is not a real person. Technology can do that. It's just not embedded. And, as there are more and more of these attacks and as they cost more and more money, there was one just last year, the year before, in Hong Kong, where, a full suit of AI avatars were used against a UK multinational corporation against their financial officer sitting in Hong Kong in their Hong Kong branch office. And they were able to steal $25 million before he finally thought, this must not be right, and called the CFO himself. It's a great story. I tell the story in my new book, but that stuff's scary. Now, AI avatars are going to be wonderful for, there's a bright side and a bad side to all technology, right? Like AI avatars, if you've lost your voice, or, you don't look good that day, your avatar can pop up there and speak for you, right? Can look the way you want to look. It's going to kind of change the way our interpersonal reactions go, but it's also going to help people who have, physical problems or physical issues, like I've lost my speech, or I can type what I want my avatar to say, and can be in a Zoom conference just like everyone else. So I think that, getting back around to the question, we need to find ways to use technology to bridge this gap in how society has changed because of a pandemic that very abruptly threw us into a new way of communicating.
Yeah, and this, like you said, is going to be a new moving target that I think is going to be more complex than ever. But I think we have really to act on this. So coming back to practicalities and the work you do, so how can corporations mitigate these risks?
Right.
How can we go practical, let's say, at least 1, 2, 3 steps on the legal side, on the technology side, and probably on education? That is, I think, still the biggest part for me.
Yeah, well, fortunately, the second half of my book, the second part of my book, is a methodology that I've come up with how companies and individuals can do exactly that. Everything from the consumer who is buying something online to an enterprise corporation that is seeking to defend their systems from a major ransomware attack, DDoS attack, those sort of things. And there are really 4 steps, and the steps are the same things that I would use when I was hunting a spy deployed in the FBI. You have to prepare, right? You can't wait until the pressure situation, wait until the attack to say, maybe we should invest in cybersecurity, but you have to prepare. And there are a couple of ways to do that. Just sort of, this is the micro answer to a very long answer, right? Preparation means you understand where your data is and who has access to it. If you can't do that, then you're dead in the water because the attackers will find a way in. So you find out where the most critical data you have is. That's where you're going to lay your protections. And you have to understand who has access to it. Some of the biggest breaches in the last 5 years have occurred because an employee left or a vendor who had a VPN into your system was no longer a vendor, but the account was left open and the bad guys found it, right? And it didn't have two-factor authentication. So all it was is a username and password that they bought off the dark web for about 5 cents, and then were able to steal millions of dollars. So knowing who has access to that data is critical. That's privilege control and making sure that only the people who need to know have access. So in the FBI, we used to call it compartmentalization. In James Bond, it's for your eyes only. If you don't have to know the information, if you don't have to use the information in what you do for your job, you shouldn't have access to it. So you sort of layer your access controls. So you're prepared. And that also means you're investing not only in cybersecurity, but someone who can advise you on how to do this right. Not every company can hire an entire team of cybersecurity professionals. Not all CISOs, Chief Information Security Officers, are complete, sophisticated cybersecurity professionals who know every aspect. So they might need help too. So that third part of preparation is don't feel that you can't ask for help. Ask for help along the way. So you're prepared. You also have to have a plan. What happens if you're attacked? How are you going to communicate? You're prepared. And then you have to assess. This is where most companies get it wrong. And people too. You can't just prepare and then set and forget. We invested in cybersecurity. We installed it on our computers. We have a plan if there's an attack. We figured out where our data is and who have access to it. And we're constantly making sure that when people leave, that we're cutting their access, that sort of thing. But things change. Suddenly you acquire another company. You hire a vendor. Now they have access to your data, and you have to revise your entire plan. So that assess part means you're constantly looking at your plan, tweaking it, and making it work. That plan will let you know when an attack is happening. When someone has a foothold, when an account has been compromised, cybersecurity raises flags and says, this person is accessing something they're not supposed to access. Then you have to go into investigation mode, which means you have to be ready. Who is going to come investigate? Can you do it internally? Or does someone have to come in from the outside? Do you have them on speed dial? Are they ready to come in and help you? That investigation has to happen very fast because the longer it takes, the more that attacker will compromise. And then finally, you have to make a decision. You have to make a decision, and that decision might be shut down everything so we can kick the bad guy out. We're going to lose 2 weeks of work productivity, but it's not going to be a catastrophic attack. It can be, we're locked by ransomware and we're going to pay the ransom because the pain point of remediation is too high. It's not always the best solution, but sometimes it's the only one. But you have to make decisions, and those decisions have to be informed by your plan. And sometimes companies fail right there because they're paralyzed. They don't know what to do. They've got a plan. The attack happened, but they haven't thought about, what do I do next? How do I handle this? And they haven't asked for help. For individuals, the number one thing, and I know this gets said a lot, but it is also the biggest failure that individuals make. Don't rely on your password. I told you, Dinesh, I was going to get back to this. Passwords are dead. They just don't work. There was just a release, a mega database breach, where 2.9 billion passwords, usernames and passwords were published from the dark web. And it's just a collection of all of these dark web resources. They're all out there. You change your username and password, it gets lost somewhere and it's already gone. The company loses it. The ice cream place that you use that password on loses it. And it's all for sale. All they need to do is figure out who you are and buy them off the dark web and try them. So if you're not using something beyond a password, and this is where two-factor authentication comes in, you've already lost. That's the bare minimum now. And by two-factor, and I know you're a sophisticated audience, but just because this is so critical, that text that comes to your phone with the extra link, that authenticator app that you've installed that gives you the one-time code, the extra email that comes that gives you the code, something beyond the password. You should never just be logging into anything with the username or password. because the people who are only using the username and password, they're the ones who are going to get attacked. There's plenty of those out there. Don't be one of those people. It's like that old yarn. How do you outrun a bear? You trip the slowest guy. Let the bear get them. That's how you get away. You be the one who turns on the good cybersecurity and protects yourself.
Well, wise words and very important. Please, for people listening to us, pause, repeat it, and write it down, or at least buy the book and the different things. And of course, Eric is very present online. So, Eric, you have an upcoming book, The Invisible Thread, and you touched that education is going to be, and there's an entire part about that. But tell us a bit for people listening to us, and I'm sure I'll be the first one reading it and having it with me. But I think for our audience, it's going to be a key element as well for everyone listening to us.
Right. Well, there are a lot of books on cybersecurity, and there are plenty of books on cybercrime. But I found in reading them that they didn't grab my attention. And so the way I wrote Gray Day is like a spy thriller, because I want people to read it, I want people to invest in it, and I want people to be carried by the story. So I'm writing a story about, nonfiction, true story, about cybercrime, why it is such a burden on society right now, how it has grown so large, what the dark web is, through storytelling. So I'm going to tell stories about actual cyber attacks, cyber espionage, cybercrime attacks, some of the biggest ones in history to some of the smaller ones that I've personally dealt with, to one that actually got me. I mean, I'm a trained spy hunter who's a professional, and these cyber criminals were so adept that they just almost got me at the very last minute. I noticed the scam. The idea is to change the way people think about cybercrime. And what I'm doing is putting you through the same training that I learned as a counterintelligence investigator in the FBI in how to stop cyber attacks. So I will teach you in the book, in the first part, in how to think like a bad guy. All the ways that they are attacking us. Using deception, using impersonation, using confidence scheme, all the ways they're using AI to fool us. The whole first part of the book, which is the longest part of the book, is putting you in the mind of the bad guy so that you understand the way they're going to attack you, all the different ways. And then the second part that we just talked about a little bit is thinking like a spy hunter, acting like a spy hunter, actively identifying the attacks before they compromise you, and then stopping them in their tracks. And it's all through storytelling. So, it's the kind of book that you'll want to read the next chapter to find out what happens next, but you will learn an immense amount about how cyber criminals are doing this and the way that you can be better than they are at their own game.
And I think that is an element of gamification that is great. I'm looking forward for the book and a big success for that. So to wrap up, and I want to be respectful of your time. So last two questions. So first of all, with the landscape of cybersecurity continuously evolving and we touch AI, things are going to change faster than ever. So the first question is, what do you think the next decade holds? And we touched some of these things, but especially for national and international and corporate security. And as well, you touch a very important thing. There's our social engineering, because at the moment, there's not only just the hacking of company secrets or IP, but as well our identity, which is probably one of the most sensitive stuff. And there's a lot of things right now with deep fakes of all these things, people that unfortunately go through horrible things with their ex-wife or husband, and all of these different things, but as well the stolen identities and so forth. Mm-hmm. So how do you see this kind of specific trends and technologies that you can believe can dominate the field and can actually help us as well dealing with this? Besides what you said, you touched a lot of these things, but just highlighting these areas that are much more about our personal integrity that relates with us. And like you said, you're working from home. I'm working most from home as well, although I have a team worldwide. So I think all of us in the end of the day are dealing with our families, and suddenly my child might go and pick my computer and see something very secret about some kind of software and just plug in a YouTube or stuff like that and goes. And this happens, I'm sure, to all parents and everyone. So I just want to touch this because this is probably one of the most complexities as well, because I cannot complain. I have a good house. I can have my space. I'm sure you as well. We are probably exceptions. Most of the people that have a lot of these things. So I want to touch this and now we can see the next decade, because the challenges are going to be much bigger and the velocity as well and disruption.
I think that there will be a modified return to work just to get there. I think that there is some pressure on companies to bring people bring people home, is what they say. Look, remote is convenient, but it is not good for cybersecurity, and it is also not good for the congeniality and the connections in the workplace that you need. I mean, some of the most inspirational moments come in those non sequitur moments where you just run across someone in the hall and you weren't planning to meet with them, but you started talking and you just found a solution to a huge problem. That wouldn't have happened if you didn't just cross paths. We don't cross paths anymore. We schedule meetings. So I think we've lost a bit of that. And I truly believe you're seeing a lot of pressure in companies to bring people home, back to offices, to physical offices, at least for like a day a week. Now, a lot of companies have downsized, but I think it's the ones that have the really big offices that are renting a lot of square footage and feel like they got to fill it. So in that sense, I think there'll be a bit more of it, but I don't think we're ever going to get away from the remote work. I think that is the way the world has moved. It's made workforces very global. How do you make people come to an office if you've just hired people from, 10 different countries around the world? That's not going to work. So I don't see that 100% happening, but I do see there will be some pressure to do it. In terms of trends, here's a big one. I think, and I truly believe that in the next number of years, and let's say within 3, we will have a global catastrophic cyber attack. And what I mean by that is something that impacts millions, and where I think it's going to be is critical infrastructure. There are many predictions. The World Economic Forum has predicted for some time that there will be a catastrophic global mutating event, which could be anything. It could be another pandemic. It could be an asteroid that hits the world. It could be something crazy like that. But they predicted it's going to happen by 2026. One of them is a large-scale critical infrastructure cyber attack, and that's where I'm putting my money. There have been significant probe attacks at the West, not only by Russia and China and Iran and North Korea, by others, where they have actually been able to embed themselves into the critical infrastructure of Western countries like the US, UK, Canada, Germany, you name them. And the idea there is to prepare for any sort of future war. Now, I don't know if there's going to be a future war, but the world is kind of in a precarious place. There are 2 wars right now that I didn't think we were going to see a war in Ukraine, a physical war. I mean, they've been launching cyber attacks at each other, but not like this. And then, of course, what is happening in Israel, and things are becoming heated. We don't have the best global geopolitical relationship with Russia right now, East and West. And all it takes is one catastrophic attack, and we don't have lights and power. And I think that is what we're going to see. Something that doesn't just happen for a day or two, but something that is lasting. I believe this so strongly, and I don't think that this is conspiracy theory at all. I think this is very well debated and of a big concern for not only U.S. government, but industry and power companies. I put a bunch of solar on my roof. I have power wall backups, and I'm prepared for it. I think that we all need to be, and I think what that needs to do is light a fire under governments to harden our power grid, make it more resilient, and protect the cyber infrastructure of our distribution of power in general. Because I think that is the next area of attack for any geopolitical world conflict.
Yeah, very wise words, and I think I will wrap up. So last one. And I think for people that want to be updated on this, and of course there's your book coming. There's a lot of information. There's as well your different parts. But for people that want to become, so especially young people, because of course we're talking about the future of work or not having work, or as well the 9 to 5 disappearing and a lot of different things. But for us, there was just a study actually coming this week that there's millions of positions around cybersecurity that are not taken. So there's a lot of opportunities there.
Right.
Let's look at the positive side of this, and how can we, especially young people and startups and ecosystems and professionals, they want to look at this and prepare themselves to tackle the challenges, like you just said, on the personal level, but as well on the professional level. What would be the advice from your experience as well?
Exactly. So one thing is to specialize. Don't just go for a computer science degree. Specialize in cybersecurity, specialize in threat hunting, specialize in the particular sciences in the counterintelligence of cybersecurity that are going to be immediately deployable. There are so many openings for people who have a knowledge of cybersecurity. It's the fastest growing industry after cybercrime, which makes a lot of sense, right? As cybercrime grows, as cyber espionage becomes more of a problem, every company needs individuals who understand this. There are full cybersecurity companies that are just built with people who understand this. And so having a basic knowledge and concept that transcends into some specific skill is going to make a young person incredibly marketable. And we need so many more innovative, bright young minds who will be the next solution to solving the world from all of these cyber attacks. I tell young people all the time when I speak to colleges, when I speak to high school students, look, if you're interested in this world, it is a career that is never going to end. Even the military, our big military branches in the U.S. all have these massive cyber warfare and defense centers where they're training, the next round of officers in how to defend against these sort of attacks, because they know that the next war is going to be primarily fought in cyber. So I think that if you're looking at getting into that world, then you're going to have a wonderful career with a lot of opportunity.
You work as a general counsel and chief ethics officer. So we touched all these challenges that will create a lot of, I would say, questions. And of course, we have all these theories of conspiration. You guys in the US are going a bit paranoid on that with the elections and so forth. How can we keep our ethics, and especially with your experience as chief ethics officer, and keep a bit of feet on the ground, but as well a sense of, I would say, some kind of sanity in the middle of all of this, especially when it comes to all the challenges that we spoke during this last 1 hour and a half?
Yeah, ethics are what defines and informs us. Our ethics, our system of ethics and values separate us from the criminals. I mean, the criminals are those who are not acting ethically. I mean, even a spy might say that they're acting ethically because they're doing something to promote, geopolitics just depends on what side, the spies are that spy against the U.S. for Russia are their heroes, and our spies is spy, right? But in cybercrime, that's pretty black and white. You can cross a line very easily as a professional in cybersecurity to becoming a cyber criminal and probably make a lot of money, but you're sacrificing your ethics. And I think that it's very important to act ethically, even as we're doing some very robust research. And I'm working with a company that is creating synthetic malware. Now, it's de-weaponized, so if it was stolen, it couldn't be used. But the idea is to train AI in identifying malware, and you can't do that unless you have malware to train it against. So you have AI building malware that's defanged, and then training AI to spot malware so that cybersecurity can identify the bad stuff before it infects us. But you can think of the ethics that are required in order to do that in an ethical way. And it's with anything. If you work in government, your ethics are what keeps you from becoming a Robert Hansen and selling secrets to the highest bidder. You work for a company, your ethics are what makes you a good corporate citizen, a good colleague, and someone who's not going to steal information and post it online because you're angry at your boss, or sell it to the competitor down the street. These ethics are what define us as human beings. And without them, we're no better than any bad guy launching attacks off the dark web.
Wise words and important ones. Eric, it's been a fantastic journey here. I learned a lot today. I felt more secure because you are very sane in the way you look at this. So first of all, kudos for all your career and for actually making us more protected for all of us. I think everyone listened to us. And for people listening to us, please follow people like Eric, read his books, and engage, because we need more sane and actually wise people. Thank you, Eric. It's been an honor.
Thank you, Dinesh, for having me on. I appreciate it.
Thank you.